A lot of different ways in which it can evolve, including the amassing of troops suggests that there is a major military operation in the future, at least towards Gaza. There's also this open question of Iran's involvement and what that might lead to. And the larger the scale of the conflict, obviously the larger the market impact. But if you look back at some of the past skirmishes we've seen between Israel and Gaza, there tends to be a pretty limited impact, in part because we're not affecting oil directly here. I think we'll just have to see how the conflict evolves, though, to better assess the market reaction.
Well, of course, you heard the former speaker, Kevin McCarthy, in the Capitol yesterday, speaking as no one else seemed like they were going to step up and fill that void at the time, Joe, as we discussed yesterday. But he talked about the idea of the U.S. needing to more strictly impose sanctions on Iranian oil. And that kind of is one of the concerns, right? The flow of oil, not just from Iran, whether that supply could be restricted, but also what Iran may do in retaliation in the Strait of Hormuz. Can you just kind of walk us through what that could look like hypothetically?
No, I think that's a really good question. And again, we know that Iran has been watching this closely. No direct evidence of Iranian involvement yet, including coming from senior officials in Israel, from the White House. Biden just spoke to this, as did John Kirby earlier today. I think it remains to be seen the reaction there, and I think that will in large part drive Israel's reaction towards Iran. I think another key variable here is what happens to the frozen, then unfrozen funds,
that's $6
which
billion.
Exactly, which the White House has said earlier, made very clear that they could suspend that again if they felt the need to. There's clearly a deterrence effort here to try and prevent any other regional forces from trying to take advantage of the situation, which is why I think they made that threat clear and put it on the table, but still very much an evolving situation here.
So when we consider economic impact, your broad view then drives this through the oil market, right? Are we missing the ball somewhere else when it comes to consumer behavior, the impact on travel, for instance? Are there other areas of the economy that could be impacted by a conflict like this?
I think there's definitely other areas that can be affected. Obviously, Israel is also a major tech hub. There's a lot of other industries that run through this region. So I don't mean to simplify it just in terms of oil, but I do think that oil tends to be kind of the big marker in the region in terms of what people are looking for and when they're reacting to events in the region. That being said, I also think it's early days to go too far in saying that the rest of the supply chains in the region are going to shut down at this point. I think a huge part of this might be how long Israel can sustain Iron Dome and its defenses and make sure that the rest of its economy can continue to run as normal. Right now, I don't see any indication that that's under challenge. The U.S. is already sending resources towards Israel. There's a stockpile available in country that can help reinforce. But the duration of the conflict is going to be a key variable here. Obviously, Ukraine's been stretching global ammunition resources. The Defense Industrial Base is under strain as it is. So there's a question looming on the horizon of, if this extends much further, will there be enough resources to sustain those air defenses, allow their economy to function as normal?
Well, and just the question of, can additional resources go through the appropriate approval process in a timely manner, given what we're seeing in the legislative branch at the moment. President Biden, in part of the speech he just gave, said, "We will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens." So that speaks to kind of more of the economic element here, and defend itself. But is that something that can be guaranteed at this moment? How does what is happening on Capitol Hill make what the White House is trying to promise more difficult?
The current moment, the resources that are already on their way to Israel, so additional ammunition and other equipment to help sustain Iron Dome, DoD has made clear that they can send that with the current resources, and authorities don't need anything from Congress at the moment. At the same time, we're seeing the administration's clearly trying to keep Congress up to date, briefing members of Congress earlier today on the situation, and I think laying down a marker that that situation might evolve and that they want to have the ability to seek additional resources if needed. So yes, a real question looming on the horizon, the House discussion later tonight among Republicans on selecting a speaker candidate, the possible vote tomorrow, where that will land the House, and then obviously pushing an aid package through. I do think there tends to be broader bipartisan support for Israel.
Than say for Ukraine.
Exactly. And so the odds there, if they can get a speaker so that they can actually start pushing business through the House, I think the odds there are pretty good, but the first question, the prerequisite, is obviously they have to select a speaker.
God knows when that's going to happen. As we spend some time with Bloomberg's Jenny Welch, having just heard from President Biden, if you're just joining us, we did hear at last from the commander-in-chief on the situation in Israel following a conversation that he had with Benjamin Netanyahu. Here he is.
In this moment, we must be crystal clear. We stand with Israel. We stand with Israel. And we will make sure Israel has what it needs to take care of its citizens, defend itself, and respond to this attack.
Jenny Welch, you mentioned the DIB. I like that, the Defense Industrial Base. This is something we talked about with Mark Esper last hour, about the challenges in manufacturing a lot of weapons at once. If we are going to stand with Israel as long as it takes, according to President Biden, much like we are with Ukraine, according to President Biden, will there need to be an executive order, an act of Congress, or something to start accelerating supply chains and manufacturing chains to this end?
There are a lot of options at the administration's disposal. There's things like the Defense Production Act, where the administration can kind of push defense companies to surge production of certain things, or even surge production of widgets that go into those things.
Yeah.
It really depends on kind of the package of materials that they're looking to increase production of. There's also obviously additional orders that can be put in that can help incentivize production. The challenge here is really the lead times that are often involved in weapons production. So a lot of times defense companies won't start a production line until they actually have a contract or order on hand. Then they'll invest the resources. So you kind of have to walk backwards from that point to determining where you're going to end up in the future. And that's been part of the challenge with Ukraine, is there has been such a relatively quick surge in terms of need, and it's hard for supply to catch up to that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, as Ukraine is engaged in this conflict with Russia, just as Israel is now engaged in conflict with Hamas, and we have heard Russia coming up in these conversations as well. We were just speaking at the top of this hour with retired Lieutenant General Ben Hodges, who was talking about Russia's influence on Iran. We heard Kevin McCarthy again at the Capitol yesterday talking about a new axis of evil being Iran, Russia, and China. Jenny, how much is this really about the Middle East, and how much of it is about these wider geopolitical dynamics?
I think you can't isolate the region from the wider geopolitical dynamics. I think that's a really good point. And China is walking headfirst into this with some of their recent comments in response to what's been happening over the weekend. I think from China's perspective, they are clearly trying to stay as neutral as possible while also recognizing that they have interest in the region and want to be more of a player in global geopolitics more broadly. I, at the same time, don't expect that they will play nearly as much of a direct role as the United States will be. Clearly, the U.S. is already engaged in the region, sending the carrier strike force right up there to support Israel, engaging with diplomatic partners all around the world to try and kind of rally around Israel. I think China's still kind of watching and waiting to see how things develop, but will want to at least have a voice in the discussion.